Mr. Levin, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Excellent to be here.
Every semester I show my students Rikers in American jail. I think it gives such a good glimpse into the criminal justice system in this country, into the penal system in this country. What was it like making that documentary?
Well, it was very moving. I mean, in that I had been to Rikers back in the 70s. And obviously, it's not a place that you want to go. And conditions were pretty bad. But hearing the testimony of the characters that are in that film was just harrowing. The movement to close Rikers had been picking up momentum. I think the film added to that momentum, and yet Rikers is still here. And it's very, very dispiriting. Obviously, there are stories like the Khalif Browder story and others that have moved people. And I mean, just to take it back a moment, I've often been asked, since I've done quite a number of films in prisons and jails, and I'm about to go visit San Quentin in a week or two, why? And I've often wondered myself, why? But when I was a teenager, one of my good friends, very close friends, was found hung in the Dade County Jail. Now, this is in January of 1970. And I was just a teenager, and obviously that was a shocking and tragic moment. And it was listed as a suicide. But knowing my friend Gordon, the wise ass he was, and the more I've learned over the years and heard stories, including the stories that are in Rikers, the more I've wondered, was that really a suicide, or was it something else? And I think that's haunted me and has led me back. Obviously, the DC jail is where I did the film Slam, which is going to be re-released this winter. I originally tried to do it in Rikers, but that was at the end of the Giuliani administration, so that proved to be too difficult. But yeah, the testimony of those characters and the idea that you can end up in this kind of no man's land where you're not convicted and you're not acquitted, and yet you're living in hell and treated less than human is frightening. And I think those characters, it's often just, I think we worry at the beginning that, wow, these are just talking heads telling their story, testifying, really. And I remember Bill Moyers saying the most powerful special effect in all filmmaking and television is the human face. And that's often discounted. But I think, going back to your question, I think the faces of these people, the voices of these people were so real, so powerful in the way they were able to articulate what it was like, that it was actually ended up, and the fact that you're even showing it to your students, it ended up more powerful than if we had just gone in a more conventional sense and shot, this is this cell block, this is that cell block. That's kind of, I was doubtful, but it's great to hear that you're using it, and that it's alive today.
Folks like me teach students that the prison system here in the US is supposed to rehabilitate, right? And when I show this movie to my class prior to starting the movie, I tell them all that there will be moments that are difficult to get through. And if you're offended by some of the things that you see, that's okay. And, things of that nature. What does that movie show about rehabilitation?
It shows we've abandoned it. That's what's bringing me to San Quentin, is Governor Newsom has kind of stated that he wants to turn San Quentin, which is a notorious high security prison that has the California death row, over, I think, 300 inmates on death row, into a new rehabilitation model based on the kind of Scandinavian model of treating inmates as human beings, not less than, and in restoring this idea that rehabilitation is not just a moral force of helping people and of having them regain their humanity and a future, but it actually makes more economic sense that we have productive citizens, instead of paying thousands of dollars a year to keep people caged up, many way beyond their kind of aging out of criminality. So that I mean, whether he can pull it off is a whole other question, and that would be the documentary. This is kind of a, I mean, as I say, there are models, not in this country, but in the Scandinavian countries that he's gone to, and trying to change the institutional thinking that we've become so accustomed to, that we've kind of accepted you can't change it. It's just the way it is. There is no such thing as rehabilitation. It's really just punishment and warehousing, and kind of a business model of using human, kind of as a commodity that have to be caged and worked in certain places. So, I mean, originally, when I went out there in the 70s, there was some programming, and I'm sure there is now, that Liza Jessie Peterson wrote a book about teaching adolescents out on Rikers Island. The role that Sonia Sohn played in Slam was kind of modeled on that kind of character of somebody who is willing to go to Rikers Island, they're willing to go into a jail and try to talk to young men, and try to kind of somehow reach them that rehabilitation isn't just some, do-good idea, or, okay, you're going to lose your status, you're going to lose your cool, you're going to lose your street cred. No, you're going to lose your life the way you're going, and you're going to lose everything. And being an intelligent, involved human being and citizen that can make a difference is a choice that you better not just dismiss as some like do good, I'll go to church. It's hard to crack through, as I'm sure you're well aware. So I think how to reintroduce the idea of rehabilitation as something that is a worthwhile goal for a society, for those people who have made mistakes, is a great challenge. And again, I'm curious to see how Newsom is going to try to navigate, because it's not just the detainees, the inmates, the prisoners, whatever you want to call them. It's the guards, it's the correctional institution, it's the administration. It's all one. And changing the psychology of that is an enormous undertaking. So I'll let you know in a few weeks. I'll have a better idea, at least, of where they're starting.
You mentioned Slam a few times, and see you have the poster there behind you. What were you hoping to convey in making that movie?
Well, I think that creativity, the creative mind, is the ultimate escape from being imprisoned. Obviously, we think of prison or jail as physical, but we all know you can be imprisoned in many ways, and you can be in boxes and cells, many psychological ways. So the idea was that the young pot dealer who gets thrown into the DC jail, the belly of the beast, uses his creativity, uses his words, uses his ability to, in a sense, defend himself and immobilize those forces of violence in a way that few believed was possible. And so that creativity, being a creative thinker, is the key to freedom.
What drew you to make Brick City?
Well, I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which borders on Newark. So I grew up before I was a teenager and moved to the suburbs of Jersey. I grew up in a working class community that was blue collar, much like Newark. And when the riots happened in Newark, I was a teenager. And my parents were very involved in the civil rights movement and involved in Ken Gibson, who became the first Black mayor of a major U.S. city. So I was always interested in Newark. And then when Cory Booker, became mayor, he was obviously a very charismatic guy. And this idea of, revitalizing a city that I knew, a city that I, even when I played basketball as a high school basketball player in the suburbs, it was Newark. It was going up against Newark. It was going up against the best in Newark. Newark still had a certain street cachet, when I came of age. Obviously, it had the literary, Philip Roth came out of Newark. There was a big Jewish community in Newark that migrated to the suburbs where I eventually was a teenager. So all those things drew me to, can you really revitalize a city like this? It had its heyday. Can you bring it back? And so much of politics is focused on Washington. And where we just get one dysfunctional report after another. Today is a great example. The government's about to shut down. Nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. And senators and governors, again, it's hard to see the policy in effect. Mayors, the local politics, you can see it. If there's a snowstorm and the schools are closed and the roads have to be cleaned and electricity goes down, all of that you can see. So it's a much realer way to try to look at the interface of politics and people and real people's lives and how that works. And that has intrigued me, since boyhood, probably. So all that came together. And then finally, in Cory Booker, you found a man who wasn't afraid of. He embraced the camera. Okay, you could say he himself joked, "I'm a media whore." He would joke that he loved media, he loved movies, he loved books. He was a thinker. He'd gone to Stanford. He was an athlete also. So there were many touching points we had, and he was willing to let cameras in places that I think very, very few elected officials would ever. In Brick City, I can't remember if it's season 1 or 2, but we were in his office with his inner team when one of his key cabinet members was indicted by the federal government. Who would let you in at such a moment like that? And then, of course, Ross Baraka, who's mayor now, was the principal of Central High School at that point. And when some of the shootings happened, he had that assembly that went viral when, he made that speech, "This is not normal." So there was a cast of characters in Newark that was very attractive. There was access that you couldn't get anywhere. And again, I didn't grow up there, but I grew up around there. So I felt it was like home base.
So much of your work, whether it's Newark, whether it's Slam, whether it's the Rikers documentary, others obviously that I want to talk about, focuses on marginalized people. Why do you think that is? Is that something in your past, something that just kind of draws an interest? What is it?
Well, when I made Slam, I once went down to, I don't know if it was Howard, but it was one of the Black colleges outside DC. And the film showed, and I came on stage afterwards to do the Q&A, and there was a gasp in the audience. They were like, "That's Marc Levin." I think they expected to see a young black, director instead of at that time, middle-aged, Jewish guy from New York. So that question has been with me, and I made 2 films after that where, in a sense, I tried to answer it. I made a film, White Boys, and then I made a film, Brooklyn Babylon, with the Roots. White Boys, about white and their fascination with black hip hop, and Brooklyn Babylon, interracial love story of a young black man and Orthodox Jewish woman in Brooklyn, which is where my family's from. So I think that it's from my upbringing. My parents really were activists. I was at the March on Washington as a kid. My parents brought myself and 2 of my sisters to that when Martin Luther King made his "I Have a Dream" speech. My parents were labor organizers. So I think they inculcated me and my sisters in both that's part of our calling. My grandfather used to have a funny saying, how he summed it up. He became very involved in the Jewish Reconstruction movement. And he had this saying, what does God mean? And he says, take the first level G, take the second level and double it, GOO, and take the last letter D, and it's go do good. So I think it was a, family. And then I think my own roots in Elizabeth, because when I got to suburbia as a teenager, at first I did feel a little out of place, not only as a Jew in a kind of WASP community, but, as kind of a more working class, what would be called back then greasers, just more of that than the country club community that I moved into. But I think that part of just my makeup of being on the street as a kid, playing on the street, and just getting in kind of mischief the way I did when I grew up. And my sister is closest to me, who both of us have stayed in the city. I think there was an urban part of just my personality. And certainly basketball, which became my passion as a teenager, led me, the co-captain of my high school team with me was black, and he led me in the 60s, into black culture and black nationalism and everything that was happening. He was my co-captain, he was my buddy, and that was an eye-opener. So I think all of those things, but it was never a plan. In other words, I never felt I was setting out on a mission. I just kind of found myself organically attracted in these directions, in these relationships, and it just kind of happened naturally.
You mentioned basketball a few times. You made I Promise, the subject of which was LeBron James. You made Anything Is Possible, terrific movie on Showtime about Kevin Garnett. What drew you to those projects?
Well, as I said, when I was 13, 14, 15, 16, that I don't know that I've ever been as single-minded about anything as I was when I got, addicted to basketball, became a basketball player, eventually a high school player. So that's a starting point. And of course, I've been a fan ever since, a dispirited fan, in that I live only blocks from Madison Square Garden. And I, from my youth, remember the glory days of the Knicks championships in 1970, 69, 70 series and 73. So, I love basketball. And I kind of buy into, there's a book out now, David Holbrook's book on basketball, basketball, how basketball can save the world. I think it's the title of it. And I kind of buy into a little of, the sports cliche that sports teaches you all these values of sacrifice, discipline, teamwork, etc. I buy that, and I do buy that basketball has been kind of this progressive. Even if we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, the WNBA is of the sports, the major sports out there. It's been the more progressive force in involving itself and speaking out on issues of social justice, et cetera. So I think all those things. When I met LeBron, I'd followed LeBron's career since he was in high school in Akron. But I told him, honestly, I said, I got to be honest with you. I've rooted against you my whole life, as a Knicks fan. But now what he was doing in Akron with the I Promise School and the LeBron James Foundation, I was moved and impressed that, obviously a lot of athletes give back, but the scale he was attacking this at was monumental. In fact, as I learned, the I Promise School originally, when he said, I wanted to start a school in Akron, he was advised to do a private academy, as some other stars have done, because that you control. You're not dealing with the Board of Education. You're not dealing with labor, unions, et cetera. You can do what you want. And he said, no, I went to public school. So then they said, do a charter school. And he said, no. I went to a regular public elementary school, and that's what I want to set up. So, and on top of that, he wanted to do it for the bottom 25% of the kids who were tested in second grade. Most, when they do that test, and the bottom 25% are projected to be the dropouts, the ones that, are on the street, enter gangs, et cetera. So that is such an ambitious undertaking that I was just amazed, and I still am. I'm in talks with them about returning at some point, because they've expanded the canvas. The school's expanded now all the way to ninth grade, and following some of the kids, obviously, that we followed back 5-6 years ago. Kevin Garnett now, and so I have tremendous respect for LeBron, both on the court and off. Kevin, I met at a Super Bowl party in Los Angeles, and we just hit it off. Now, he is such an exuberant character. I mean, he's probably one of the most intense athletes ever, intense competitors. And that intensity is in his life outside the court. And he and I hit it off because I just didn't realize that his year in Chicago, which obviously in the film, is a critical part of that film, when he came from South Carolina for his senior year in high school in Chicago. What a life changer that was, because he was like a country boy that came to the city, and he didn't know anything about the vice lords and the gangster disciples, and Chicago, like LA, one of the key gangs scenes, and that high school that he went to was right in the middle of all of it. So when he met me, he was like, you made Gang War, you did Mr. Untouchable. It was like a whole thing. You did Chicagoland, the families behind the GDs, he was just questioning me, and I was just amazed by his appetite and his intellect, because he never went to college. He was the first of his generation, go right to the pros. So we just hit it off, and out of that came KG Anything Is Possible, but also I work closely with his company, Content Cartel, now, as they're expanding into a lot of other stuff.
I wonder what making Inside the FBI taught you about the FBI.
Well, that might be a subject for another show. That was an amazing experience, because I was inside the FBI. Of course, I didn't fully realize it, and it wasn't the focus. But of course, when all this was happening, all this meaning, them leaking information to Trump and the Hillary, emails and the whole thing. I was at that point, because I knew Dick Wolf and had a relationship with him. My focus then was, on kind of humanizing who are special agents? What's the FBI really about? But that was a period, if you remember, 2015, 2016, where ISIS was out of control. It was, there was San Bernardino, there was Orlando, there was Paris, there was Brussels. It was just there was a bomb right here in Chelsea, 2 blocks, in a dumpster, right around from where I live and from my studio. So to have access to the JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, Carlos Fernandez, who was the head of counterterrorism, to form a friendship. And now these were friendships across, as I made clear to them, and I'm sure that they discussed it in their own way. When I was a teenager in the 60s, I was kill the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover is the enemy. And 9/11 changed a lot, obviously. And here we were working together. And I'm sure a lot of the people I worked with, were Trump supporters and conservatives politically. But we struck up a friendship. And, Comey, it's funny because he and Dick Wolf, obviously, that's how it all happened. They had a chemistry, and Comey decided to give us unprecedented access for a year because he was convinced that, the FBI needed a new generation of people coming in and needed a more diverse group of men and women. And when I first met Comey up at West Point in 2015, that fall, I remember saying to Ann Began, who was the head of media relations, who we worked so closely with, he'd be a great Republican nominee. Now, I was with Ann Began a year and a half later. In fact, it was only months after we premiered the series and with Comey in Washington at the New Zine, that we were down at Quantico, which is the training room. And we were driving back, and it came on the radio that Trump had just fired Comey. And Ann broke down in the car. I had to pull off to the side of the road. I guess, on one level, on a personal level, I kind of went into a world that for many years I probably would have seen on the other side of everything I stood for. In fact, my parents were investigated by the FBI. I got their file and found common ground with some of the people I became friends with. And of course, as I said, 9/11 changed everything, and the counterterrorism mission and the whole idea of not just being a law enforcement operation, but being an intelligence operation in a world where the threats are coming from all over, and how do you defuse them, stop them, et cetera, instead of just waiting after a crime happens and going after. So the whole FBI changed, and I was in the middle of that, and I met a lot of good people. At the same time, I saw how these institutions work, it's how hard it is, when we were talking about the prison industrial complex, how hard it is to change institutional thinking and bureaucracy, the so-called deep state, just how difficult it is for a guy like Comey. Look what happened to him. Now, look, he had his faults, and there was a self-righteousness, about him. And still, he was probably, kind of the most open-minded and intellectually facile director of the FBI we've ever had. To see how he got lost in the politics of the moment. I was in Carlos's office when he made the speech on July 3rd about Hillary Clinton, which was, I remember Carlos looking at me. Now, I knew Carlos didn't like the Clintons, but he just looked at me, and it was like, that was a mistake. That was a mistake, meaning the FBI publicly involving itself in the whole political process, which then, months later, only a week and a half before the election. And I interviewed Comey in December before he went public. It was almost like a dress rehearsal for, kind of, and of course, asked him with a room full of lawyers in the room, was it a mistake what you did in July? And then, of course, what you did right before the election, 10 days before the election. So it was sobering. And I often think about, because I'm working on a film right now that so involves the FBI's role back in the 80s and the 90s. I'm doing a film called April 19th for HBO that'll be on this spring, that looks at the evolution of political violence through the retelling, the lens of the Oklahoma City bombing story. April 19th is the date of the Oklahoma City bombing. It's the date of the Waco tragedy. It's Patriots Day, the day the first shot in the Revolutionary War was fired in Concord, Lexington. So in the patriot movement, the far-right patriot movement, that date has tremendous significance. And the FBI, of course, has got, unfortunately, Waco, Ruby Ridge, and the Oklahoma City bombing investigation. Obviously, McVeigh and Nichols and Michael Fortier, he turned government witnesses, his wife Lori. But, there's always been the questions, unanswered questions, John Doe number 2, others unknown, prior knowledge, etc. So I've kind of come full circle, and I'm dealing with the other side of the FBI right now.
Mr. Levin, I really appreciate your time. You're discussing with me your work, which is obviously so interesting, so compelling, stands the test of time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Dimitri. Thank you very much.